Welcome back. As we delve into Chapter 4, we're going to talk a lot about research problems, the questions and hypotheses, and really delve into the terminology that's going to help us through the rest of the chapters. First question. A research problem is a perplexing and enigmatic situation that a researcher wants to address through disciplined inquiry. This is actually the very definition of a research problem. What is a hypothesis? Is it that perplexing or troubling condition? We already know that that is the research problem. A statement articulating the research problem and indicating the need for the study. A specific query that the researcher wants to address in addressing the research problem, or the prediction about relationships between variables. And the answer is D. So when we look at the research problem, the problem is the overall what if, or what is the situation. The problem statement is the justification articulating why the research problem is necessary to answer. And research questions are really the what's, the what happens if, the what about, or those things that we're constantly looking at and trying to answer. And that, again, as we said, the hypothesis is really a prediction. So the next area we talk about is the basic terminology. And the basic terminology continues talking about statement of purpose, which is the researcher summary of the overall goal, or the aims or objectives. And that is the specific things that we hope to accomplish by the study that we're undertaking. So sources of research problems really spans the area where you function. So we know that experience or clinical work really feeds a lot of our what ifs. The other is nursing literature. If you look at studies that you're going to be reading, we often see recommendations for further studies or next studies or repeat studies. So we often will use that as an impetus to start kind of asking those questions. Quality improvement initiatives. So maybe we've undertaken a small pilot quality improvement project, and we want to know how that quality improvement project would hold up under research standards. Social issues such as social determinants of health, external suggestions, and then patients' involvement. So when we're looking at defining and developing and refining our research problems, we really want to start with a broad topic or cast a wide net. And as we look into the literature review or what is already in the literature, that is going to help to narrow the topic and focus our inquiry. What is going on with, what factors contribute to the I'm curious about. So when we look at developing our research problem, we're going to look at, is it significant? If it's not a significant problem, my guess is that the time and effort that you're putting into doing the research study is not going to be worth the trouble, essentially. Is the problem researchable? So are you going to be able to conduct the research study or plan it accordingly? Is it feasible? Time, resources, cooperation of others, and is it your interest? And as I said, my area of research really kind of was something that developed by accident. So it wasn't something that I said, ooh, I feel super passionate about falls, and now I'm going to just spend my entire career looking at falls. It really was something that kind of evolved as my job evolved and my responsibilities evolved. So basic things about your problem statement is they should identify the context and significance, the consequences of the problem. It should talk about where the knowledge gap is, and that is really where you need to focus, is where are the gaps, whether it's in knowledge or concerns related to that practice. It should be narrow enough to serve as something to guide your study, and it should propose a solution to the stated problem. It also in quantitative study is going to talk about your key study variables. It'll talk about, you also can talk about possible relationships among variables, although that is not necessarily something you need to do, and we're going to talk about directional versus non-directional hypotheses. Indicating the population of interest. Is your interest critical care? Is it the community? Is it med-surg? So you're going to really have to narrow that population. You don't want to start off with a huge population and make it a huge study. I suggest that you start small, and then you can always repeat the studies and increase your subject pool. And that, when you're developing your purpose, you're using verbs that help you drive your comparison or inquiry. In qualitative studies, the statement of purpose is going to be quite different. It's going to identify that central phenomenon, and it's really going to talk about the research tradition or what type of research theory you're going to use as an underpinning for your research study. You'll also have to indicate the group, the community, the setting. So again, is it community health? Is it med-surg nurses? Is it patients? Is there a setting that you're interested in? Critical care, again, community, pediatrics. And you'll also use those verbs that'll help drive the inquiry. So question number 3 is, statements of purpose in qualitative studies may encode the tradition of inquiry, not only through the researcher's choice of verbs, but also through buzzwords associated with those traditions. So what is grounded theory? So grounded theory is really looking at process questions. We're going to talk a little bit about theories.
I'm not sure I understand.
So when we talk about research questions are direct wordings of the purpose. So worded as a question, that is the what. It helps to clarify or lend specificity to the purpose statement. So you may give this broad background of why you're doing this study. But the research question really is the down and dirty and what you're looking at. And those in quantitative studies, it's going to be very cut and dry and pose queries about the relationships between A and B, or the independent and dependent variable. When you look at research questions in qualitative studies, you're going to pose queries that are more linked to tradition or grounded theory, looking at what is the process. When you look at phenomenology, those are meaning questions. So describing the phenomenon of homelessness. And then ethnography is really looking at a group of individuals who have a shared culture. So when we look at the definition of a hypothesis really is a statement. It's not a question. It's usually a statement that talks about a prediction. It always includes an independent variable and a dependent variable. And it must contain terms that indicate a relationship. And that relationship may be that there is no relationship, or we don't see that in a certain group. But we're often looking at associations. Definitely will talk about that predicted relationship. And I think people think that one thing impacting the other, whether in a negative or not impacting, is not. When we look at directional versus non-directional hypotheses, directional hypotheses will tell you if one thing will increase the likelihood or decrease the likelihood of that dependent variable. And a non-directional hypothesis to talk just that one thing will influence the other. And when we look at our research studies, we're going to go through examples. We will definitely talk about what those if a hypothesis is directional versus non-directional. So a research hypothesis will state the actual prediction of that relationship, but a statistical or null hypothesis may talk about the absence of that relationship. And so we're going to go through some examples of these as we move forward in our critiques.